Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Care for Rare webinar series. Um, Care for Rare webinar series is being organized by Organization for Rare Diseases India with the help of our support sponsors Lifestyle Diagnostics and Genewall Lalpath Labs. Care for Rare is being um, put
Power
forward.
on. You plugged into Nirvana.
Okay. Care for Rare webinar series is being put forward with the help of doctors, medical fraternity, patients, parents, research students, pharma, and clinical alliances. The reason that we are putting together this particular Care for a webinar series is to make sure that we provide a resource sharing platform to support our common goals of advocacy, awareness, education for the benefit of stakeholders in the rare disease segment. And today we are in a special moment of the Care for a webinar series. We started on June 6th with Dr. Meenakshi Bhatt's webinar, and with the support of all the speakers, audiences, patient support groups, volunteers, sponsors. Today we have successfully completed 24 Care for a webinar series, and today we are doing the 25th Care for a webinar series, and we have a very special guest with us today. He is Dr. Sanjeeva GN. He is an associate professor of pediatrics at Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health in Bangalore, and he has more than 2 decades of experience in pediatric genetics. He is also in charge of the Center of Excellence for Rare Diseases at Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health in Bangalore. Today, Dr. Sanjeeva GN is going to talk to us about the management of Gaucher's disease and his experience gained at Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health and experience gained in treating Gaucher disease patients in Karnataka. I extend a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Sanjeeva. Hello, Dr. Sanjeeva.
Yeah. Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for that nice introduction.
Thank you, sir. Audiences, please reserve your questions till the end, or you can also put your questions in the chat boxes. And I request Dr. Sanjeeva to take over. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. At the outset, I would like to thank WRDI, especially Shirol, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this webinar series. And we know that Madam was the first one, and I'm 25th one, probably the last person, because their new series is going to start from this weekend. So this October month is a Gaucher month, and tomorrow is supposed to be Gaucher Day. So it's all the more special for me to talk on Gaucher disease in this platform, and it will reach the people who really matters in the management of this rare genetic disorder. Lysosomal storage disorder. Especially, hello, yeah, especially if you take hello.
We can hear you, sir. We can
The
hear.
thing is, it's echoing me.
Initially, it was echoing. Now it is not.
Okay, thank you. So, when you take treatable lysosomal storage disorder, Gaucher disease stands at the way ahead of any other disease with respect to the prevalence, and it's an inborn error of metabolism. It's one of the type of inborn error of metabolism, uh, primarily due to deficiency of enzyme beta glucocerebrosidase. This enzyme is required to degrade complex macromolecule called glucocerebroside, which is a glycoprotein. And this protein is naturally degraded in lysosomes of macrophages. So when this deficiency of this enzyme happens, in that child, these macromolecules are undegraded and they start getting accumulated in the macrophages of various organs. So this enzyme is located in, as I said, in lysosome, and the deficiency is due to mutation in a gene called GBA gene, which is located in the chromosome, located on chromosome number 1 long arm. So this disease is characterized by a progressive course. It's a chronic course and a clinically heterogeneous manifestation, multisystemic involvement. Heterogeneous means not every child will have all the manifestations. Some of them will have some of them will have different manifestations. It's a multisystemic disease and it is debilitating. That means it's associated with a lot of morbidity. And if you don't treat them, it is definitely life-threatening or life-limiting disease. So this is a famous graph of depicting various lysosomal storage disorder, incidence of lysosomal storage disorders based on a newborn screening, a huge newborn screening program. So you can see here, out of these many lysosomal storage disorder, Gaucher disease is the big pie in the whole chart. It's around 14%. And when you look at the treatable disorder, definitely this is the most common lysosomal storage disorders. And this Gaucher disease is inherited as autosomal recessive disorder. What does that mean? That means in any family who is affected with Gaucher disease, in the subsequent pregnancy, every pregnancy, there is a risk of having the same problem, having a child with the same disease is around 25%. So similar to any other autosomal recessive disorder, this disease is also associated with higher prevalence or higher risk in a consanguineously married couple. So we need to keep in mind whenever there is a consanguinity and there is a family history of Gaucher disease, you have to be carefully evaluate the whole family so that we can prevent the disease happening again in the family. And I already mentioned this disease is a heterogeneous disease, clinically manifest in a different form. So that's why it is classified into primarily into 3 types: type 1, type 2, and type 3. This classification is based on the involvement of neurological system, that is central nervous system, that is neuropathic or non-neuropathic. And even in neuropathic, sometimes again it is divided into 2 types: acute neuronopathic and chronic neuronopathic. So type 1 is classically non-neuronopathic and worldwide it is most common. But due to some unknown reason, this is not so common in our Indian setting. But in worldwide, in Western countries, in Middle East countries, this is the most common form. It's also called as adult form. So it can, the age of onset can vary from infancy to childhood. So as it is already said, non-neuronopathic, the neurological manifestations are not seen in this type. And these patients primarily presents as splenohepatomegaly. Majority of them will have bone disease and lung involvement. The progression is again variable. They will have an indolent course, slowly progressive course. Whereas type 2 is quite rare among these 3, and it is a acute neuronopathic. That means they manifest very fast in their early infantile period. So they present during birth or immediately after birth. Majority of them definitely before 1 year of life, and they will have severe neurological involvement in the form of tone abnormality, swallowing difficulty in the form of bulbar palsy, and they will have squint. They will have these arching episodes, and they majority of them don't survive beyond 1 to 2 years. So the progression is very rapid, and most of them die before 2 years of life. Whereas the type 3 chronic neuronopathic form, which is surprisingly very common in our setup as compared to the Western countries. So again, this can manifest any time from infancy to adolescence. And again, there are 3 types in these 3 subtypes. So the classifying subclass determining phenotypes are in type 3A, they will have myoclonus, and in type 3B, they will have oculomotor apraxia, and type 3C, they will have cardiac calcification, valvular or cardiac calcification. Apart from that, all of these children will have splenohepatomegaly, Bone disease, though it's been mentioned, but we are not we are seeing some of the bony changes, but not particularly bone disease in many of these children. Pulmonary disease, especially post-splenectomy situation, we are seeing pulmonary disease, and the progression is variable, but it's a life-limiting disease. But with the proper treatment, we can definitely improve their quality of life. Now, the core to the pathophysiology of Gaucher disease is undegraded glucocerebroside macromolecules, which are accumulated in the lysosomes of monocytes and macrophage cell lineages. These macrophages are variously described as a tissue macrophage in spleen, Kupffer cells in liver, in bone marrow, osteoclasts in bone, and alveolar macrophages. So these macromolecules can get accumulated in all these organs, and accordingly they will manifest clinically. So the clinical manifestation includes in a young child, it will most of them they manifest with a huge spleen and liver, that is splenomegaly and hepatomegaly. Consequent to this huge splenomegaly, these children can also have hypersplenism. That means the spleen will start utilizing the start destructing the blood cells, so they can have cytopenias, bicytopenia, tricytopenia, monocytopenia. So they can have all three. Apart from this, these children can also have growth retardation. Because of infiltration into bone marrow, they can have pancytopenia. They will have in type 2 and type 3, they can have CNS manifestation, varied manifestation. In chronic, it may be subtle, but in acute, it will be very rapid course. In adult, in type 1 form, there may be bone manifestation in the form of pathological fractures, collapsed vertebrae, osteonecrosis, avascular osteonecrosis, osteopenia, and some of the deformity like Erlenmeyer-Flass deformities. And many a times these patients can also present like a bone crisis, which is most often missed as a osteomyelitis. So you have to be very careful when we are dealing with a patient with Gaucher disease with acute bone pain. So, and the X-ray features may be suggestive of osteomyelitis. So these are some of the clinical photographs of untreated children who presented initially with huge splenohepatomegaly. And unfortunately, because of low awareness among healthcare professionals, these patients would have gone to many health practitioners before they are diagnosed with Gaucher disease, and they would have gone to a lot of alternative medicine. And we can see a child who has been branded with so many places. So these are quite common clinical scenarios what we are going to see. So most common presentation in our setup is splenohepatomegaly. You can see how the child is wasted, that is growth retardation, and mild developmental delay because of these huge hepatosplenomegaly. And in the bone, you can definitely see Erlenmeyer-Flass deformity in this X-ray. And in type 1 Gaucher disease, 80 to 100% of the patient will have some amount of bone disease, which may be in the form of pathological fractures, osteonecrosis, or osteopenia. So, but in type 3 and in our setup, these are quite rare. We are definitely seeing these deformity in the form of Erlenmeyer-Flass deformity. And some of these children can have vertebral compression, collapse of the vertebrae. You can see avascular necrosis. So these are different bone manifestations. Some of the rare situations in the context of Gaucher disease, a condition called as Gaucher type 3 disease, type 3C. Here, these children presents with a normal intellect, and most of them will not have any dysmorphic features. And usually they present as a cardiac problem in the form of extensive cardiovascular calcification of endocardium, valves, mitral or aortic valve, aortic root, aortic arch, and they present with cardiac failure. And when you do an ophthalmic examination, they will have oculomotor apraxia, and they can also have corneal deposition of corneal deposits. And invariably, they will have mild to moderate splenomegaly, and maybe features of hypersplenism in the form of cytopenia. And this type is associated classically with a particular mutation called D409H, homozygous D409H. This is a very rare condition, and the response to the therapy is not very optimal in this subtype. So you can appreciate the echocardiogram showing calcification of endocardium, valve leaflets, aortic root, and arch of aorta. So this is a cardiac CT showing cardiac calcification. Unfortunately, there will be a relentless progression of this cardiac calcification, and without now a lot of controversy on the interventions also here. So this is a really clinically challenging situation. And this is a slit lamp microscopy of the cornea. We can show the crystalline deposit in the mid to the posterior stroma of the cornea. Another variation or another rare manifestation or a rare type of Gaucher disease is Saposin C deficiency. Saposin C is a cofactor. So the clinical presentation is similar to Gaucher disease type 3. They will have visceral disease, more of a massive splenomegaly and pancytopenia. But these children will show Gaucher cells in the bone marrow. But their enzyme levels are normal and gene studies will be normal, because it is caused by a different molecule, deficiency of different molecule called saposin C, which is a cofactor required for the optimal activity of the beta glucosidase enzyme. So the confirmation of diagnosis is by genetic testing, and in these patients the enzyme replacement therapy is not going to work because the enzymes are normal here. So now there is a favorable response to this miglustat therapy, which is a substance reduction therapy which is now being tried in adult Gaucher patients. So this same drug can be used in these patients, and it has shown very favorable response in vitro studies in some patient cases also. So this is a child who had a saposin deficiency, presented as abdominal distension for the age of 3 years. He had a severe skeletal disease also. He had this homozygous deletion in PSAP gene. So how do you diagnose Gaucher disease? So most often clinical presentation in the form of splenohepatomegaly with anemia, thrombocytopenia, bleeding tendency, skeletal involvement. And when you do bone marrow, and ophthalmic examination might show oculomotor apraxia in these patients. And if you do bone marrow, you will see the typical storage cells, Gaucher cells. And enzyme assay, now it can be done on a dry blood sampling. So it will show that decreased level of beta glucose cerebrosidase enzyme, and also elevated levels of chitotriosidase biomarker. It's also very important. So if you do gene testing of GBA gene, you can able to confirm the diagnosis. And in our Indian setup, I'm going to talk about that. L44P is the most common mutation now in Indian setup. So this is one of our experience. This is an unupdated data. We had around 56 affected individuals from 52 families, out of which 60% had consanguinity, and 88% had presentation which is similar to 3B, like ocular, visceral, and hematological findings, and 60% of them had L44P homozygous mutation. Currently 30 children in our state, including 6 patients from ESI, are on enzyme replacement therapy, which is government funded, and some of them are in the charitable access program also. And currently the cost of therapy for a 10 kg child is 30 lakhs per annum. So thanks to the judicial intervention, all these patients are getting a regular and continuous therapy, and hopefully this will continue. Now, when it comes to therapy, as I said, basically this acid beta glucosidase enzyme, it is required to degrade this glycosyl ceramide, that is glucocerebrosidase, into a ceramide and a glucose. So into a lipid and a glucose, it's a glycolipid. Since this enzyme is missing, what we can do is we can replace this enzyme by an enzyme replacement therapy. Another strategy is you can reduce the substrate for this macromolecule production. That is, you can reduce the ceramide and glucose metabolism so that the substrate is reduced and the glucosyl ceramide is synthesized in a lesser quantity, so that the accumulation will also comes down. That is called substrate reduction therapy. So there are two strategies which are available. And the enzyme replacement therapy is available right from an infancy to even adult also. Whereas the substance reduction therapy is approved for usage in adult, not in children. It's a oral therapy. It is approved for any patient above 18 years. Now, as I said, enzyme replacement therapy is core to the management of Gaucher disease. So there are two enzymes available in India now, imiglucerase and valaglucerase, and both of these enzymes are approved for the use in non-neuronopathic form, that is type 1 Gaucher. Whereas imiglucerase is enzyme which is also approved for usage in chronic neuronopathic form, that is type 3 Gaucher. Gaucher disease who exhibit clinically significant non-neurological manifestation of the disease. The dosage is 40 to 60 unit per kg every 2 weeks as IV infusion. And while giving infusion, it has to be given slowly, and we need to watch for some immune reactions. Fortunately, not many, most of our children tolerate these therapy very well. There are only few incidents of immune reactions, and which we could able to address at appropriate time. Now, there are some questions. When to start enzyme replacement therapy? Can we start as soon as we diagnose, or do we need to wait? What are the things? So usually the recommendation is enzyme replacement therapy should be initiated in all symptomatic patients. What do you mean by symptomatic patients? Any patient who has got one or more of the following features, like failure to thrive. That means their growth parameters are less than third centile for the age. Splenohepatomegaly causing mechanical discomfort or having splenic infarcts. Huge spleen will compromise the vasculature of its own vasculature and causes splenic infarcts. Severe cytopenia, at least bicytopenia, like anemia and thrombocytopenia or whatever. So symptomatic bone disease or active bone disease in the form of fractures, pathological fractures, osteonecrosis, osteopenias. So, and if this child has already undergone splenectomy, the prior past history of splenectomy is also an indication. And symptomatic pulmonary involvement is also another indication where we have to start enzyme replacement therapy as early as possible. Now, when we start enzyme replacement therapy, what are our goals? What are the things we are going to achieve by giving enzymes to these children? So, number one is the symptom will improve. Like they will have general well-being, they will start putting on weight, they will grow appropriately, their appetite will increase, they feel better. You can see that on the face of the patient. So usually it will take 6 months to 12 months to achieve this goal. Anemia, that means hemoglobin more than 10 gram percent without any transfusion should be maintained in that way. So for that, to achieve this, it will take around 12 to 24 months, that is 1 to 2 years. Thrombocytopenia, to platelet to normalize, it depends on what is the baseline platelet count. If baseline platelet count is more than 60,000, then it will take around 12 to 24 months. If baseline platelet count is less than 60%, sorry for the typo, it may take up to 5 years. What does that mean? If baseline platelet count is less than 60,000, means there is already a bone marrow infiltration. So it takes a lot of time for the clearance of bone marrow infiltration of the Gaucher cells. So it may take up to 5 years. Similarly, splenomegaly can reduce by 50% in 1 year. Further reduction will take some more time. Whereas hepatomegaly, by 1 to 2 years, it may reduce by 30%. Further reduction will also happen depending on the various factors, whether fibrosis is there, what are the other features. So those things will also there. And bone symptom and complication, bones manifestation will become symptom free or a complication free by around 1 to 2 years. Once you start ERT and it's regularly followed. So there will be catch-up growth by around 3 years, and that means we can expect that these children, when you start ERT, after 3 years, they will achieve almost of a normal height and weight. So overall quality of life, that is like playing, schooling, and other childhood activities, will take 1 to 2 years to come to the normal. Or these are our therapeutic goals. Now, I mean, as I said, these are some of the data, clinical data, where your hematological parameters, that is hemoglobin, will take, I mean, almost it will become normal by around 1 to 2 years. And your platelet count, depending on what is the baseline platelet count, it will take 1 to 2 years if it is more than 60,000, and it will take more than that if it is less than 60,000 in the baseline. Similarly, the size of the spleen and liver will also start coming down over a period of time. And DEXA scan is done to estimate the bone mineral density, to look at, because these children, because of the bone disease, they will have severe osteopenia. So how does it improve? So you can definitely see this graph where you can have the increase in the bone mineral density following initiation of enzyme replacement therapy at an appropriate dosage in these children. Okay, so as I said, normalization of hemoglobin levels, recovery of platelets, liver size normalization, reduction in size of the spleen, normalization of growth, peak bone mass, normalization of biomarkers, and normalization of bone marrow fat. So these are the common effects of enzyme replacement therapy in children with Gaucher disease. So now, what is the role of splenectomy? So we used to do splenectomy earlier. So this is a child who had a massive spleen. You can see there is a splenic infarct. You can see there is a splenic infarct. So these are some of the complications of huge spleen. Now, with the availability of enzyme replacement therapy, the splenectomy is hardly done. In fact, splenectomy is quite safe in adult, but in children it comes with a package. It comes with a lot of morbidity. So spleen is an essential organ in children. It is required for many control of many sepsis, many infections. To prevent many infections, spleen is required. So we have to prevent sepsis post splenectomy. You need to take care of a lot of things there. So splenectomy, the splenectomy itself in a young child is a operatively challenging procedure. So there will be very operative morbidity associated with that. So that's one thing. And in Gaucher disease, spleen is the biggest, what we can say is dustbin in Gaucher disease. So all these molecules will get accumulated in the spleen, and it will have a protective effect on the other organs. For example, liver and lungs. So once you remove spleen, so these macromolecules which are not degraded, they will go and start accumulating in liver as well as in the lungs. So they can have liver cirrhosis, they will have pulmonary disease. So with all these complications and with all these things in mind, we deferred splenectomy, and now with enzyme replacement therapy available, so that will be the main modality. Earlier we used to do the splenectomy to buy some time so that we can arrange enzyme replacement therapy for these children. Some of these children who has undergone splenectomy, look at this child. This child came with a huge splenohepatomegaly, and then with the enzyme with splenectomy, she started doing fine, and with enzyme replacement therapy, she almost become normal. Whereas this child without splenectomy, with enzyme replacement therapy, could able to achieve the same result. And this is another classical child where this girl, untreated, presented initially with a severe growth retardation, huge splenohepatomegaly, and mild developmental issues. And with splenectomy, she started improving. And fortunately, she got enzyme replacement therapy thanks to the charitable access bridging therapy. Now she is like this. I just can't recognize this kid. And all these things happened within 6 months of starting enzyme replacement therapy. So this is the what we can say is a sort of a miracle we can see when you start treating these patients appropriately. So as I said, enzyme replacement therapy is a core for the treatment of Gaucher disease, but there are other components also which are equally important. These are called as supportive treatment. So these children will have anemia and thrombocytopenia, which will require some time for around 1 to 2 years to normalize. So during that time, we need to support these children. We need to give them probably repeated transfusions, and we have to prevent if there are any bleeding. We have to prevent those sort of things. So supportive therapy is important in the form of blood and blood component transfusions. These children can also have interstitial lung disease that needs to be taken care of. Fortunately, we are not seeing many bone crisis patients, but if there are bone crises, that should be aggressively managed. If in spite of your good therapy, enzyme replacement therapy. If the spleen is still large and it is causing hypersplenism, we may have to remove that. If the spleen is removed, then we have to take care of post-splenectomy complications in the form of sepsis. So that to prevent that, we need to give antibiotic prophylaxis and regular immunization. And some of the school advisors, if they are carrying a huge spleen, it's a prone for it will predispose the child for spleen rupture or a trauma to the spleen. If the spleen ruptures, there will be torrential bleeding and child may bleed to death. So it's very important to take care of that. So you need to advise them not to participate in any contact sports, and we have to be very careful when these children are moving around. And they can also have, because of fragile bones, they can have recurrent pathological fractures. They need to be take care. And when these children are enzyme replacement therapy, so these children will have issues of school absenteeism. They have to come to the hospitals for infusion every 2 weeks once. So we have to talk to the school managements regarding those things and other hospital visits also. And as the child grows into the adolescent, they will have various psychological issues, coping with the disease. So all those needs to be addressed, supported. So these are all different components of supportive therapy. And how to monitor these children when you start on enzyme replacement therapy. So clinical examination, including anthropometry and CNS examination, is a must. It should be done at the baseline and every 6 months. Liver and spleen size should be monitored baseline 6 monthly, and complete blood count should be done baseline 6 monthly, every 6 months till the therapeutic goals are achieved. Once you achieve therapeutic goals, you can do it every year. Ultrasound examination to look at liver and spleen size and any other complications of these liver and spleen, like echo texture alteration or splenic infarct. So all those things can be seen, or X-rays for any bone crisis or bone issues. So it can be done in the baseline and annually, or if it is indicated in between, it can be done. DEXA scan, which will give us bone mineral density, it should be done in the baseline and annually once. And once the therapeutic goals are achieved, you can do it every 3 years. Biomarkers are done at baseline and yearly and as indicated. Some of the optional one is pulmonary function test, MRI of bones, bone marrow, and echo is done only when it is indicated. When I am saying biomarkers, what are these biomarkers? So these are a characteristic or a substance which are objectively measured and evaluated as an indicator of normal biological process, or a pathogenic process, or a pharmacological response to a therapeutic intervention. Here it is used in the baseline as a indicator of pathological process, and in the follow-up as a pharmacological response to intervention therapy. Among the various biomarkers in Gaucher disease, chitotriosidase is the common one which we are using in our clinical setup. So this is a biomarker which is produced by an activated macrophage. So we expect these Gaucher cells, these accumulated undegraded glycolipid activates the macrophage, and this compound is released into the blood. Unfortunately, this is not a very specific biomarkers for Gaucher disease. This can be elevated in so many other storage disorders also. So, and nearly 5 to 6% of the population can have a genetic variation where they may not express chitotriosidase also. So they may have a normal or low chitotriosidase enzymes, but still they can have Gaucher disease untreated or well controlled. We don't know. So we have to be very careful in interpreting such type of reports also. So to overcome this, there are some new biomarkers available, something called as lyso-Gb1, which is a downstream metabolic product of glycosylceramide. It is very sensitive and specific to Gaucher disease. So it can be again measured in serum as well as on the dry blood sample. Nowadays, the studies are going on in treated and untreated patients. Once these are out, this will be a very good biomarker to monitor the patients with Gaucher disease. Now, especially in type 1 Gaucher disease, MRI of femur is used as a prognostication of the disease burden. So what happens is bone marrow is infiltrated with these Gaucher cells, and predominantly the proximal femurs and tibias are involved, and this will correlate with the visceral disease and the treatment response. So a quantitative MRI based fat fraction measurement have been used to assess the bone marrow environment in Gaucher disease. Advantage is it's very accurate and correlates with the biomarkers in the response to the treatment. But the problem is that technical expertise is not available everywhere, and it is very expensive. And it cannot be measured in the area of osteonecrosis and collapsed vertebrae. So these are some of the limitations of this study. Now, what is there in the future, and what is there? What are the things might come in the management of Gaucher disease in future? As I said, substrate reduction therapy. It is already used in type 1 Gaucher patient, adult patients now. This is a oral therapy. It's a 3 capsule per day. It's easy. Instead of coming to the hospital every 2 weeks once for infusion, this can be taken aram set orally, just like any other management of any other chronic illness like your diabetes or hypertension. So it will become like that. Till now, it is approved for patients above 18 years. Pediatric approval is not there. Once it is there, then this will revolutionize the whole treatment delivery system for these patients. There is another thing which is going on, which has been thought about, and a lot of research happening. That's called pharmacological chaperone therapy. So here what happens is we know what is enzyme replacement therapy. So there is a defective enzyme, so you replace that enzyme. That is called enzyme replacement therapy. But not all these defective enzymes are useless. There are some enzymes which can be used with some modification. So these chaperones are the molecules which will enhance the available activity of the available enzyme or residual enzymes. So this can be called as enzyme enhancement therapy. So a common molecule called ambroxol. Ambroxol is a molecule which is available in most of our cough syrups. It's a mucolytic agent. So it is used for decades in the treatment of acute and chronic respiratory diseases. So this has been repurposed. This has been repurposed to use as a chaperone therapy in Gaucher disease. So in animal studies, this has shown a lot of promise. There are initial human studies is underway, and they're also showing some promise in this area. Now, there is a lot of talk whenever we say genetic disease. Definitely, it will not end before you talk on gene therapy. So, what is gene therapy? What is happening currently in gene therapy stage? So, gene therapy means basically here ex vivo therapy is used. What they do is they take out stem cell from the patient, and they will introduce the non-functioning whatever the gene which is defective. They will in that stem cell they will introduce the corrected gene through a vector, and these transduced stem cells are cultured, and then they put it back into the human system. So it's like a modified stem cell transplantation. Okay, so this will become a permanent source of enzyme for that patient. So it's a one-time cure. So in 1998, 3 adult patients were treated with gene therapy, but it was a failure. There was no transduction and poor engraftment. So it was a complete failure. But as on today, a new molecule has come, a new company has come out with a new strategy. From this June 2020, they started recruiting patients for phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trial of this gene therapy in Gaucher disease type 1. The recruitment has already started in Australia and Canada, and US and Israel by this year end. It's expected to halt the progression of the disease and provide one-time cure. Currently, it is they are recruiting patients above 18 years, both treatment naive as well as treatment experienced patients. And if this becomes successful, then we may try these therapy even in children also. So this will be definitely change the whole scenario of management of Gaucher disease. So to end my talk, Gaucher disease is a progressive, chronic, heterogeneous, life-limiting condition, and there are different forms like neuropathic and non-neuropathic forms. Non-neuropathic form and chronic neuropathic forms are amenable for enzyme replacement therapy, and enzyme replacement therapy is the core component of management. Supportive measures as well as close monitoring play a key role in achieving therapeutic goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that amazing talk. I learned a lot. There were a couple of questions which have come by. Um, what is the role of newborn screening in Gaucher's disease diagnosis, and what experience do we have in Karnataka about this?
Okay. So I will answer to the second question first. Currently, we don't have any experience of newborn screening with respect to Gaucher disease in Karnataka, probably in India also. Because to be frank, there is no newborn screening program in India. Now, National Health Mission is coming out with a very newborn screening program in a limited way. So they are focusing on 6 diseases. The challenges to incorporate Gaucher disease in newborn screening programs are many. Number one, we don't know the prevalence, whether really the cost effectiveness of newborn screening program is there for such a rare disease. That question needs to be answered first, number one. Second is, even to get a therapy now, it is very difficult. It's a very hard fought victory to get a therapy now. It's not easily available. And since the therapy is not available, so the basic principles of newborn screening is, when there is a easily available therapy, you will include in the newborn screening. If the therapy is not easily available, you try to defer that. Once the therapy is easily available, accessible and affordable, definitely a newborn screening in our Indian setup, a case will be made for that. That's because of our consanguinity and the prevalence. So we definitely can do that if the therapy is easily available and it is easily accessible to all the patients. So how is the ERT continued once immune reactions develop? Basically, what happened when we had few cases of immune reactions, and when we actually audited those patients, we found that it's not primarily because of the drug itself. It's because of the vehicle what we were using. That means the the infusion fluids what we were using. So then we changed the infusion, number one. Second, we pre-medicated with these patients with your antihistamics and steroids, and then we slowed the infusion rate. So slowly we could able to desensitize these patients, and every one of them are now tolerating enzyme replacement therapy comfortably without any pre-medication also.
Sir, one more question here is, so you said the substrate reduction therapy is about reducing the substrate as well as the glucose, which is also one of the things. Are there any side effects of doing that in adult?
No, substrate reduction therapy is basically, it will prevent formation of glucose cerebrosidase, not glucose.
Yeah.
So it will prevent the formation of these macromolecules, so that you don't need enzyme to degrade that.
Okay. Sir, it was mentioned that symptomatic patients are given ERT. Isn't it better to start patients on therapy as soon as possible, like via newborn screening, or should we have to wait?
I mean, currently, I don't think we have that luxury of treating patients even in asymptomatic period, because by the time you diagnose them, everybody will be symptomatic. And these are the guidelines which is approved widely across India now. Since the accessibility is a problem, so it's been mentioned that symptomatic patient. But what we are seeing is whenever we diagnose, most of these children are symptomatic, so we start therapy. Ideally, yes, what you are saying is correct. Even in the asymptomatic period, if you start, the response will be optimal, number one, and you can prevent a lot of morbidity.
So one more question, if I remember correctly, long time back in rare disease, one of the conferences in Delhi, I heard that the original the enzyme replacement therapy, there was a mutation in one of the amino acids, and then they came up with a different enzyme which is more like a wild type and does not have any added mutation. I don't know whether it is imiglucerase or valaglucerase, but have you seen any type of, because it was presented by some neurologist from Israel, and they were claiming that one of the version of these enzyme replacement therapies was working much better than the current market product. But have you seen any type of difference between enzyme replacement therapy products themselves? And because we are approaching government for funding these particular enzymes, does it have any type of implications there?
See, currently our experience is very limited when comparing whatever the two available products. Number one. Second is, only in type 1 Gaucher, there are two products available, whereas type 3, it is a monopoly, only one company is available. So, whatever the neurological manifestation you're talking, that we are seeing only in type 3. And we have only one molecule which is available which is approved in the market, so we are using that. So you don't have anything to compare there. Whereas type 1, which we have very small number in our setup, and they are doing fine with any of the enzymes. I mean, there are no difference in visual therapeutic outcome. They are doing fine. There is no difference at all. Whereas neurological aspect, we don't have any experience in that because we are not using another product in a neurological type, chronic neurological type.
Sir, coming to the neurological part, I have one question wherein are there any behavioral or some sort of markers which we can understand the early neurological involvement? How do we understand whether the neurological involvement is happening? Are there any biomarkers like SACARs or anything that we can kind of use it to study?
So usually in acute neuronopathic forms it's a different class of thing. Whereas in chronic neuronopathic form, these are very subtle clinical manifestation. So what we clinically do is we look at eyes. So this oculomotor apraxia is a very subtle eye sign, and which indicates there is some neurological affection. So that's one thing. And there may be mild dystonias, and these are good clinical. That's why I said in clinical evaluation, a detailed neurological examination is a must in the follow-up as well as in baseline. So which will give us an idea how the child is progressing. So there are no biomarkers per se, but there are clinical markers which will give us an idea about neurological involvement.
And following up with that, these neurological Gauchers, does it also respond exactly or how you are seeing non-neurological Gauchers for the therapy? You have shown spleen decreasing.
Yeah, I mean, see, basically, what we are concerned is whether whatever the product we are giving, does it cross the blood-brain barrier to ameliorate all the neurological features? Okay, so apart from that, rest of the response will be same. For example, liver and spleen, bone marrow, lung. So all those things are same when compared to the type 1 Gaucher, non-neuronopathic Gaucher and chronic neuronopathic Gaucher. Definitely in acute neuronopathic Gaucher, this is not going to work. It's been not used, and we have not seen many cases of type 2 Gaucher, that is acute neuronopathic Gaucher. Chronic neuronopathic Gaucher, till now, visual wise, they are doing fine, and neurologically, we are monitoring. Till now, they are doing fine. So whatever the approved molecule is there that we are giving, so they are doing fine. And some of the children has got dystonia and some of those things associated with chronic neuronopathic form. Their response is not that very good.
Okay, sir. And sir, this Ambroxol you mentioned about as a repurposed drug, that is also being widely used by clinicians now to address the Gaucher therapy in India.
No, these are basically an experimental drugs which have been which is still under study now, because there are issues with that. The molecule, whatever the dosage is required, is not generally available in the market. Whereas it's specially prepared for such type of trials, and those type of dosages are not available. since it's a molecule which is not, it is used regularly in our clinical practice for so many purposes, and it is proven proven drug with respect to side effect. It's proven drug, so it is used in few conditions, few situations, but it's not been studied in a way it has to be done. So still it's in the pipeline. We don't know. In the end of the day, the trial may show a promising result, it may show nothing also. So we don't know what will happen. But it's been tried. It's been happening. If it proves, if it really becomes useful, at least as an adjuvant therapy, well and good. It can be used in our setting also.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one question from Naresh Manjusha. What is the role of bone marrow transplantation in Gaucher's disease?
There are few reports and anecdotal experiences, and it's been uniformly not successful in the Gaucher disease for the reason not known. There are few reports available, but and there are few of our colleagues who have tried that also. Unfortunately, it was not successful.
Sir, given that we are in the COVID times, there is one COVID-related question. What do the patients or patients' relatives need to watch out in COVID-19, especially in considering Gaucher's?
They have to take all the precautions like anybody else do. COVID will not see whether this patient is having Gaucher disease or not having Gaucher disease. So COVID can come to anybody. So they have to take all the precautions like social distancing, mask, and avoid overcrowded places. So these are the must. The only added risk for them is they'll be visiting hospitals very frequently. What our experience has shown is we have not seen a patient getting COVID because of the contact with the hospital. It's the other way around. We have exposed to the COVID infection from these patients rather than other patients getting. These patients getting from the other patients in the hospital. So they have to take all the precautions because the COVID is now there in the community, so they can get COVID anywhere. So they have to take all the precautions. And second point is definitely any chronic disease, if it is still in an initial phase, any chronic disease will have some amount of immune dysfunction, and Gaucher is not anything different from that. And they will also have, especially these children will also have malnutrition, growth retardation. So all these things will add up to the immune dysregulation. So you have to be extra careful not to get infected with COVID. If unfortunately if they get what we have seen is a couple of patients who were tested positive for COVID. Luckily all of them were asymptomatic, and they were home quarantined, and now they are better.
Thank you, sir. Sir, given that you have been in charge of rare Center for Excellence of Rare Diseases at Indira Gandhi, particularly what is the experience of maintaining or having an idea of patient registry, especially for in-bar nervous metabolism, and what is the message that you want to send out in terms of this registry, patient registry?
No, patient registry is a fantastic idea, not just to in-bar nerve metabolism or a rare disease. See, if you ask us what is the incidence or a prevalence of even a common disease like pneumococcal disease or even a malaria, we have some epidemiological data. Apart from that, we don't have a registry. Say, for example, how many of us know that there are, how many of us notify a diabetes? If a patient is newly diagnosed with diabetes, are we notifying that? So we don't have a diabetes registry. So it's a fantastic idea to have a registry and notify each and every patient so that we know what is our burden. We know, if you know the burden, then we can formulate the policy to address that burden, address that problem. So definitely we should have a registry. That is having one thing. But how to have a get a registry? It's not a simple thing. So you need a coordinated long-term effort to establish such system, to have to develop a robust system to have to notify and to register all cases of rare diseases. I can give many examples. For example, even tuberculosis now. Tuberculosis is a notifiable disease, but still there are lot many tuberculosis cases are not registered, are not notified. Okay, when such a scenario is there, so and this tuberculosis program is going on from last 50 years. Still now we are struggling to get a good registry of tuberculosis. So there are challenges, but it is not something which is unachievable. It can be achievable, but you need a good concrete program. Somebody has to take a leadership for this and a program, and it's not individual effort or individual institute effort. It has to be a state effort or country effort where everybody should participate and should have a robust registry.
So you mentioned that there were certain particular high incidence mutations like L440P type of mutations in Gaucher's, particularly in your cohort. So I was wondering whether those sort of mutations, and some of the pharmaceutical companies are coming up with products which are specifically useful in certain mutations. So whether having the mutation data helped you while you were working at the as an in charge in the Rare Disease Center for Excellence and Rare Disease in ICH.
I think we should not get into that mutation business now, because see, the thing is L444P is the most common mutation in Indian setup. It will say just there is a mutation in GBA gene. Okay, so at the end of the day, it depends on the clinical features which will categorize the whole patient scenario. And currently there are no mutation specific therapies available. The therapies are available whether there is a neuronopathic or non-neuronopathic form. And L444P is known to be associated with the chronic neuronopathic form. So accordingly, the approved product will be used for that. Tomorrow somebody comes with a specific gene editing or something which is specific to L444P, then for example you take Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where you have a mutation specific therapies are available. So exon skipping, say if 51 exon is deleted, then you will have that exon skipping, so you will have a specific product for that specific mutation. So unfortunately, we don't have such type of therapy available in Gaucher. So we have product which is available for neuronopathic form and non-neuronopathic form. So depending on the patient, we are going to use that.
Okay. Sir, thanks a lot. That's all the questions that we have for today. Thank you, Dr. Sanjeeva GN, for joining and spending valuable time with us. If you have any further questions, please feel free to mail us, and please join us for the next group of webinars that are coming up. We have a wonderful amount of wonderful number of webinars that are coming up on various type of genetic disorders, and I bid adieu to you. Bye bye. Take care, and
thank you. Thanks a lot.